Good morning and welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm Mariana Siciliano, Managing Educator for Public Programs here at the Met, and it's really good to see you today. Thank you so much for coming to today's Curator Talk. We are excited to take a closer look at the exhibition Caspar Friedrich, The Soul of Nature, which is on view through May 11th in Gallery 199. I'm sure many of you have seen it already. If not, right after this lecture, please go up to the galleries and take a look at this beautiful exhibition. This program is a chance to hear directly from the curators for an overview of the exhibition and some special behind the scenes that we can only learn from those who organized it. Before I introduce Joanna and Alison, I'd like to extend our gratitude to Marina Kellen-French for making the exhibition possible, and for the support of the Janice H. Levin Fund, Art Mentor Foundation Lucerne, Barbara A. Wolf, an Anonymous Foundation, the International Council of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Trevor and Alexis Trena. Corporate sponsorship is provided by Sparkassen Finanzgruppe and Allianz X. This exhibition is supported by an indemnity from the Federal Council on the Arts and Humanities. We're thrilled to have the curators with us today. Joanna Shears Seidenstein is an assistant curator in the Department of Drawings and Prints. In this role, she holds responsibility for Northern European drawings and prints from the Renaissance to the end of the 19th century. Previously, she held curatorial positions and fellowships at the Frick Collection and the Harvard Art Museums, where she curated and co-curated exhibitions on a variety of 17th and 19th century topics, including Rembrandt, Turner, and Whistler. Joanna holds a bachelor's degree from Vassar College and a master's and PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. Alison Hokanson is curator in the Department of European Paintings and a specialist in 19th and early 20th century Central and Northern European and British painting. She has curated and co-curated exhibitions on the landscapes of Turner, Pre-Raphaelite art and design, and the sculpture of Auguste Rodin. She has published on topics including the French Romantic drawings, Belgian symbolism, and Vincent van Gogh's Cypresses. She received her bachelor's in art history from Brown University and her master's and PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. Please join me in welcoming Alison and Joanna.
Thank you, Mariana, and thanks to all of you for being here today. It takes a certain amount of courage to tackle German Romanticism before lunch, so we appreciate your attendance. As Mariana said, we're here today to talk about Caspar David Friedrich, The Soul of Nature, the most comprehensive exhibition dedicated to the artist ever held in the United States, which is on view here at the Met through May 11th. And I'm Alison, if I didn't introduce myself already. So we start this talk not with Friedrich, but with some questions. How do you relate to nature? Do you seek out spaces where you can meditate on the big questions of life, where you can get in touch with your thoughts and emotions? Do you experience wonder, longing, a sense of consolation? Do you embrace a sense of calm, a sense of harmony? In other words, do you approach nature as a site of personal and spiritual discovery? We don't often think of this experience of nature as having a history. Friedrich's work returns us to a watershed moment in our relation with the earth. About 200 years ago, at the start of the 19th century, in what is today Germany, during the Romantic period, which emphasized the inner self, emotions, thoughts, our individuality, and the inner self's responses to the natural world. Friedrich was among the first artists to try to develop a pictorial language of light, of color, of perspective, of topography to capture the ideas and sensations that we encounter in nature. And he did this at a moment of great transformation, not only the flowering of Romantic culture in art, in poetry, in music, but also the start of the Industrial Revolution, the growth of the earth sciences, and what we now call ecological awareness. In fact, that prefix eco comes out of the German Romantic period. This is also a period of intense political upheaval, in particular the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, which transformed the nation, the continent, between 1803 and 1815, which engulfed German territories, reconfigured borders, and redefined national identities. In other words, in Friedrich's art, we can see the beginnings of modern perceptions and representations of the natural world. That, at any rate, is the thesis for our show. Despite the importance of Friedrich's work, he is relatively little known in the United States. This exhibition is only the third show dedicated to the artist, mounted in the United States. We're very proud the Met has the distinction of hosting all three of those exhibitions. And the current show brings together the only 5 paintings by Friedrich in U.S. museums, including the Met's own Two Men Contemplating the Moon, and the handful of major drawings, including our eastern coast of Rügen with Shepherd. And the fact that we have a painting and a drawing by Friedrich gives us one of the richest Friedrich collections in the United States. As that suggests, we really relied on the generosity of international lenders, particularly in Germany, which has the largest holdings of Friedrich's work in the world, and where the artist is widely known and deeply beloved. And it's difficult to overemphasize his place in German culture. The 250th anniversary of his birth in 2024 was celebrated with numerous record-breaking blockbuster shows and books and events and a 23-page newspaper insert and even a new national park. Therefore, this exhibition, putting it together, was really a transatlantic, diplomatic, and scholarly effort, much of it in person. We spent a lot of time in Germany, traveling around Germany to meet with our colleagues and to build and earn their trust. And you can see here a map of all the locations in Europe from which we drew loans for this exhibition. This was an exploration for us, not only of these great collections that we got to know, but also of Friedrich's own landscape. And you can see here some of the pictures that we took of some of the sites that Friedrich depicts, which are still extant. We joke that this exhibition should actually have been sponsored by the German Tourist Board, given how much travel went into it. And we're very proud to be able to showcase iconic works of art, many of which rarely travel, and many of which have never before been seen in the United States, from 35 lenders about in Europe and North America. And we're particularly grateful for the generosity and the partnership of the collections of Friedrich's work in Berlin, Dresden, and Hamburg, which are the deepest, richest collections of his work anywhere in the world. So with that, I will turn things over to Joanna.
So, with a selection of 76 of his paintings and drawings, this exhibition traces Friedrich's creative path over the entirety of his 4-decade career. And that path unfolded in and around what is now Germany. In this period, and this means both before and after the Napoleonic Wars, not a single nation, but a constellation of separate aristocratic territories. And the artist, whom we see here in a self-portrait made at about 25 years of age, just as he's starting his career, he was born in the small university town of Greifswald on the Baltic Sea. And after a period of training both there and in Denmark at the Royal Academy in Copenhagen, Friedrich returned to the German lands and settled in the flourishing artistic center of Dresden, which he would call home for the rest of his life. making frequent sketching expeditions in the mountains and countryside surrounding the city, as well as back along the Baltic coast near his hometown. And it was this terrain, which, as you can see from this map, makes up a rather small slice of present-day Germany, a far smaller area than Alison and I traveled just to pursue loans for the show. And it was this terrain that Friedrich reimagined in hundreds of paintings and drawings, all together forming one of the most important and distinctive bodies of landscape in the history of Western art. So to offer a little glimpse into that behind the scenes, the making of the exhibition, we opted to present the works in such a way that the exhibition unfolds both chronologically and thematically. So giving this very rich, comprehensive picture of Friedrich's career and development as an artist, but also highlighting the themes and ideas that emerge most vividly at each phase of his career. And the through line, as reflected in our subtitle, The Soul of Nature, is that fundamental understanding of nature that Alison discussed and that Friedrich himself also wrote about. In a manuscript from about 1830, so toward the end of his career, he writes that art should be suggestive, open-ended, in other words, that it should, quote, stimulate the mind and give space for the imagination to play. And further, that the artist's soul should be reflected in his art, that he, the artist, he or she, should recognize the spirit, the essence of nature, absorb it, and give it back again in the form of a picture. And this is really a very new way of thinking both about nature and about art in the period. Today, we think of art as something that is meant to be interpreted in a variety of ways, but that idea really comes from the German Romantic period. And so in addition to inspiring the framework for the content of the exhibition and the flow of the show, we also took these words to heart and how we installed it, wishing to leave that space, physical and conceptual, for visitors to have their own open-ended experiences, to bring their own personal thoughts, ideas to the works of art, which Friedrich himself clearly wanted. And this manifests in what we hope feels like a light touch, and one that allows works to be seen both from afar and up close. Now, sightlines are always an important consideration in an exhibition, but they were especially vital for this show, given that landscape, and particularly Friedrich's landscapes, are all about vantage point and space. And our wonderful exhibition designer, Mario Perez, very early on came up with the idea of these wall openings, like the one you see here. So you're standing in one gallery and you can see into the next. But you can also, as you walk around, they provide a different vantage point on those works in the subsequent gallery. So it creates this kind of dynamic changing view as you walk through the space and experience the works from different angles. You can see that here. These wall openings also allow us to draw subtle connections between works from different periods, as you can see here. And to offer just a few more behind-the-scenes thoughts, you can see from this slide that we have used a few different paint colors. This is our palette, and it took some time to arrive at this color scheme, and they probably look a bit different on the screen than they do in the galleries. But it's 4 tones of a sort of grayish, brownish violet color. Hues we felt were somehow both earthy and airy, like Friedrich's landscapes, and these are the colors that we found made his works look their best and their most beautiful. And so whether made up almost entirely of shades of blue and gray, or whether totally monochrome drawings made only brown ink, or as is quite often the case, richly colored, much more so than initially meets the eye, with crystalline tones of green, pink, violet, and yellow. It was these works that really dictated our choice of wall color. And we also wanted to point out you can see the galleries here. And we wanted to point out the graphic design work that went into the show. And so when you're in the space, you may not realize it at first, but if you look closely at both the title wall and the titles of our section texts, you'll see that they're actually three-dimensional. And so the title wall on the right here, the upper portion is in relief and the lower portion is recessed into the wall. And so as you get close, it has this beautiful sculptural effect with light and shadow playing across the positive forms and negative spaces of the letters. And, I have to say, before working on this project, I really thought of graphic design as something totally two-dimensional that happens on a computer screen. So it was so fascinating to see the design team working and thinking through it with these very tactile, physical elements. And on that note, I'll just plug, on April 10th, there will be a Met Experts talk with the graphic designer who worked on the show, Sarah Pulverenti, who will share fascinating thoughts on this process. So now Alison and I will take you sort of through the show, sharing our insights about some of the highlights. So in the first gallery, we see Friedrich's early exploratory work as he is launching his career in Dresden, absorbing those romantic ideas that were just emerging and circulating in the period. Ideas about individuality, subjectivity, perception, and of course, that idea of nature as a site of emotional experience. And you'll see him seeking different ways to express that pictorially. First with figures in the landscape, but then increasingly and grounded in his practice of drawing from nature, of being in the outdoors and observing individual trees, rocks, land, water, sky, developing that sensitivity to space and light that Alison mentioned, and with which he invested the landscape itself with feeling. In addition to the 76 works by Friedrich in the show, there are an additional 12 works by his immediate contemporaries, most of which come from the Met's own collection, for an American institution, a quite strong collection of German Romantic art. And these works by artists working in Friedrich's orbit in Dresden offer a sense of his artistic community and context and put in relief the distinctive qualities of his work. So for example, we see here on the left a large drawing by Friedrich, and on the right, a drawing by an older artist working in Dresden, Gottfried Jentsch. Both drawings were made about 1803, 1804, and both depict the same subject, the same exact place, a natural rock arch in the vicinity of Dresden, a popular tourist destination. And it's about 3 miles long and extremely narrow. At points as narrow as 35 inches. And written accounts from the period note how frightening it was to walk through it and what relief one would feel on the other side. And I think you could see from the slide, and when you see these works in the show, just how different these works feel. Jentsch delineates every detail of the surrounding rock face, the path through the arch, and the figures who are arranged laterally across the image, such that we read their individual facial expressions, whether awe, curiosity, or trepidation. Friedrich, by contrast, accentuates the dazzling height of the rocks with his vertical composition, and he places just 2 tiny figures deep in the distance. They're really just silhouettes. We see no specifics of identity, of costume, and we cannot read their facial expressions at all. But we don't really need to. In a way, their body language, in combination, importantly, with the gleaming light and the towering rocks, expresses what we feel. We don't read, but we feel the rush they experience as they greet the open air and bright light, having made their way through the dark and narrow arch. And so we see Friedrich here finding his footing as a landscape specialist. And this leads us directly into the second section of the exhibition, which focuses on the moment of his professional breakthrough. which he makes with other large-scale ink wash drawings, which he exhibited at the Dresden Academy between 1803 and 1810. Among them, this masterwork, a major loan to the exhibition from the Albertina in Vienna. Critics lauded this work when it was on view in Dresden in 1806 for its technical virtuosity, the Friedrich's ability to render an entire landscape in a monochrome medium and to use the untouched paper to convey the luminosity of the moon and its reflections on the rippling water. And they were equally struck by the palpable mood and emotion, the melancholy, solitude, longing, all conveyed in the complete absence of figures by and through the landscape alone. Now, the place depicted, the island of Rügen in the Baltic Sea, not far from Friedrich's hometown, was known for its strikingly spare landscapes, which Friedrich accentuated through his compositional simplicity, a reduction of detail that would become a hallmark of his work. Rügen was also well known as the home of a prominent poet and pastor named Ludwig Kosegarten. And precisely on the site depicted here by Friedrich, Kosegarten was famous for delivering shore sermons for the sake of fishermen who could not leave their work to attend church. And so Friedrich has chosen here a landscape associated with spirituality, a form of religious practice fundamentally integrated with and within nature.
As Joanna mentioned, Friedrich really comes on to the art scene as a draftsman, and it's not until several years after he's established himself as a bold new talent that he, essentially goes public as an oil painter. And when he does, many of his early paintings depict religious symbols of suffering, of sacrifice, and of consolation, wayside crosses and crucifixes, religious ruins, common to German terrain. And so the next gallery in the exhibition focuses on these works and on the intersection in Friedrich's art and in the period on nature and faith. These paintings reflect, on the one hand, Friedrich's own Lutheran upbringing. On the other hand, they also reflect the, for lack of a better word, the zeitgeist of the time. These works are made at the height of the Napoleonic Wars. It's a period of immense uncertainty, great anxiety in German lands when people turn to religion, to these traditional symbols of hope, right? For this sense of solace. And these works also reflect, in the broadest sense, the romantic search for new encounters with, new understandings of the divine and the sacred that are rooted in the natural world. And we can see here a work that he depicts of the ruins of a monastery at Eubin in Germany. And next to it, another work made by a very good friend of his from the Met's collection, Carl Gustav Karas, a depiction of the same site. And this is another one of these pairings that we use throughout the show to give some definition to what makes Friedrich unique. And you can see how Friedrich has manipulated the architecture and choreographed the light in this work, choreographed the surrounding landscape in order to create this very magical, luminous, evocative moment. You know, this is a painting that is in many ways, much more emotional, which is subjective, right? That's a difficult concept to qualify, but it is much more emotional and mystical than Karas, who takes a much more naturalistic approach to depicting the same site. This section on nature and faith culminates with this painting, Friedrich's Monk by the Sea, one of his most radical and well-known paintings here in the US for the first time. Friedrich wrote that in this work, he sought to evoke the mystery of the future, the unknowability of the hereafter, and the vanity of human ambition. He wrote that no matter how deep your footsteps are in the sand, a wind will sweep across them, and they'll be erased as if they were never there. It's that German romantic drama for you. Friedrich set himself a real challenge with this picture. How do you represent what is, in essence, unrepresentable, a confrontation with the unknowable, with one's own mortality, one's own smallness in relationship to the vastness of the cosmos? And this solution, when he exhibited it in 1810, challenged and shocked viewers. The painting's evocation of the infinite and its minimalism, its reduction of the landscape to this strip of beach, this strip of water, the way that most of this painting is given over to the sky, to clouds, and to light, was an artistic breakthrough. Friedrich's contemporaries didn't have the benefit of having seen an abstract painting. That wasn't a concept that existed for them. Painting was supposed to tell a story or to convey a message. And so they were stunned by this work. One critic wrote that this painting was like the apocalypse, that looking at it was as if your eyelids had been cut off because there was so little to orient the viewer. Again, a little bit of that German romantic drama. This emptiness, as I said, this emphasis on passages of color, of paint, of space, I think is striking even centuries after it was created. And that's one of the things that's so remarkable about this painting, is that it continues to seem ahead of its time, even 200 years after it was made. When I started working on this exhibition, my sense of Friedrich as an artist was really based on works like this. So I had a sense of him as a very solitary, very melancholy, very misunderstood kind of guy. In fact, however, he created for himself a very rich community of friends and a family. And the next section in the exhibition looks at that personal and professional circle in which Friedrich's creative process unfolded. We focus on the artists with whom he explored and sketched the natural world, with whom he exchanged stylistic strategies, ideas, techniques. Many of them were connected with the Dresden Academy, where Friedrich was a member and then a professor. And we highlight in this section drawings and paintings like these, which commemorate their shared experience of the natural world. On the left, we see a drawing that Friedrich made outside before the motif. And at the very top, you can see a figure, likely one of his friends, and perhaps his friend Georg Kersting, with whom he went on many sketching exhibitions. And on the right, we can see one of Friedrich's paintings, the one in the Met, which depicts one of his pupils and possibly also the artist himself. So these are works about experiencing, contemplating the natural world together. In this section, we also get a glimpse of Friedrich's studio, the place of artistic creation, where he would take sketches like the one on the right, which he had made out in nature, and he would adapt and combine them into imagined scenes, either on canvas or on paper. The studio was also a place where Friedrich's personal and professional life intersected. So the work in the middle is a portrait made by this friend, Kersting, shortly after one of their biggest expeditions together. And on the right, we see Friedrich's painting. The figure is likely his wife, Caroline, with whom he had 3 surviving children. And she's standing at the window of a later studio in the building, which was housed in the building where Friedrich and Caroline lived. And this highlights the degree to which his family and artistic life were in fact intertwined. Caroline, the figure, is at the center, the very center of this work, which is a meditation on this relationship between the interior, right? The interior of the house, the interior of the self, and the exterior, the natural world, and also really a meditation on what it means to be a painter, right? It's a play on this idea of art as a window onto or mirror of the natural world. You will, of course, notice that she is seen from the back. We cannot see her facial expression. Figures like these are called in German Rückenfigur, literally back figures. And Friedrich didn't invent this motif. They were often used by landscapists to encourage viewers to project themselves imaginatively into a landscape. Friedrich didn't invent this motif, but he did make it his own. And in his work, the Rückenfigur acquires a new meaning. They embody this essential dialogue between people and the natural world, this essential contemplation of the natural world that is at the heart of his work. In the wake of the Napoleonic Wars, which end in 1815, the overt religious symbolism in Friedrich's work diminishes in favor of more broadly spiritual imagery. And one of his major themes in the teens and the 20s is this concept of home, the familiar, the intimate, the everyday world, and away, the realm of the unknown, of exploration and travel. But in Friedrich's works, home and away are not two separate places, two separate ideas. In his cityscapes and in his coastal scenes, home and away are intertwined. As we can see in this work, where these figures are seated on this beach, right? Rooted on this massive boulder, gazing out towards the horizon, towards the moon, at incoming ships that are coming into harbor. So there's already built into this idea of going away and coming back. And as Friedrich kind of channels our gaze towards the horizon, he evokes this wonderful German concept called Fernweh, this idea of longing, of anticipation for something far away. It's the opposite of being homesick. This imagery taps into a very common conception, at least in the United States, that Friedrich's art can sometimes be schmaltzy, right? Or that the imagery is overly obvious, or that it's sentimental. And I think the important thing to remember is that imagery like this had very deep, not only existential meaning, but also patriotic meaning for Friedrich and his German contemporaries. They lived in a period in which travel, even very seemingly straightforward travel by ship, by carriage, was very dangerous, very time-consuming, and very difficult. And that was particularly the case during the Napoleonic Wars, when it was, in fact, impossible for many Germans to go home. In fact, the whole idea of home was reconfigured. Nationalities were redefined. Citizenships were redefined. People suffered displacement. Friedrich himself was a war refugee, separation from their families. And given all of this whole idea of homecoming, of what is home, what is away, can one get from one to another, was something that was very freighted for all of them.
The next section of the show, called Nature Cycles, focuses on Friedrich's interest in the passage of time, the cycles of the year, the seasons, but also the cyclical nature of human history, of construction, destruction, rebuilding, in every sense of those words. On the left, we see a drawing from 1813. So this is during the Napoleonic Wars, and in fact, the height of conflict in Dresden, during which Friedrich had to take refuge in the town of Krippen. And there, he made this watercolor of a quarry, an active quarry, and you can see a ladder peeking up over the large slab at center. But at first glance, this site looks like a ruin, like rubble. And in fact, quarries are landscapes created by virtue of a kind of taking apart of nature, the cutting and harvesting of natural stone in order to redeploy it in and as architecture. And so the peak of war, Friedrich gives us this conflation of construction and destruction, a meditation perhaps on human ambition and engineering as both at once. The exhibition also, on the right, I should say, also includes drawings of actual ruin structures. And so this drawing on the right is from 1828, so on the other side of the wars, when there was a kind of a hope amongst Friedrich and his contemporaries for unity, for him at least grounded in certain democratic ideals. And this was a hope that would remain unfulfilled until and beyond his lifetime. But centuries-old buildings like this one, long abandoned and left to the elements, embodied a kind of distant past, a kind of sense of endurance, even in the face of decay. And here we can see a tree that has taken root at the center of this tower, the shell of a tower, its own continual cycles of growth, decay, and renewal, putting in relief the dilapidation of the built structure. And you can see here Friedrich's beautiful use of watercolor to capture the textures and the play of light and shadow over the variegated forms. And so in a way, Friedrich is meditating on the place of human history within the much longer history of the earth.
Friedrich's interest in the cycles of nature also extended to the seasons, and in particular, the season of winter, which he liked because of its subtle colors, its atmospheric effects, and also its associations of purity and rebirth. This pair of pictures was exhibited in 1828. And a critic at the time made a comment, which I think is probably had a response that I think probably many of us have today, which is that Friedrich has picked two completely unremarkable subjects. These are the types of bushes and trees that you might pass by, on a walk through the park without a second glance. As the critic noted, Friedrich draws our attention. He makes these subjects special. He centralizes them on the canvas. He eliminates any sort of distractions, and he depicts them in meticulous detail, which you can really only appreciate when you see these works in person. Each twig, each needle is depicted, each with its own covering of snow. And by looking closely, he encourages us to do the same. One thing that is deceptive when you see these works on the screen is that they appear so monumental, but they are in fact quite intimately sized, about the size of a sheet of paper. And so they become almost like devotional objects, almost like icons, these tiny works that you're supposed to really engage with intimately, and which are supposed to solicit your contemplation, your meditation. These works are not only images of nature, they are also images of natural resources. When this pair was exhibited in 1828, the exhibition catalog identified the site of the works as the Dresden Heath, which is a woodlands on the outskirts of the city. Today, part of it is a nature preserve. And in Friedrich's time, it had begun to host conifer tree nurseries. You can see some baby conifers over here on the left. These tree nurseries were planted to replace the depleted timber stock. And in fact, the year before these paintings were made, in 1827, part of the heath was destroyed to make way for a military parade ground. So these works, in fact, tap into, they're not simply an image of any place in nature. They're, in fact, a very timely image of a modern place, a modern human construction of the natural world. The next gallery is called Mist and Mountains, and it captures another aspect of the changing human relationship to nature in the Romantic period. This period introduced a new appreciation for mountains as sites to encounter beauty, grandeur, danger, the immense power, and the immense age of the earth. This was a period in which the earth was newly discovered to be unimaginably old, not just 5,000 years old, right? But to have this entire prehistory that was much vaster than human existence. And Romantics termed this encounter with beauty, with danger, with the immense power of the earth, the sublime. Friedrich and many other artists in this period capitalized on this new fascination with mountains and with the sublime in their work. And Friedrich's most iconic work, The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, has become a textbook example of the Romantic sublime. We see a wanderer, which for the Romantics was this emblem of self-discovery through nature. He's climbed up onto this rocky promontory in his classy green velvet suit. His hair is blowing in the wind. And he is, in every sense, poised on the edge of omniscience, of this view, right, that affords him control over the landscape, but also of the unknown, because in fact, the valley is mist-shrouded. He can see very little. He's on the edge of mastery and of vulnerability, of permanence, stability, this rock that he stands on, and transience, the clouds, and of course, the span of a human life in relation to the span of the cycles of the earth. And he also stands on the edge of achievement and then of yearning for something still further, something still more.
So now we come to the last two sections of the show, the first of which we call Clarity of Vision. And this captures a quite interesting moment in Friedrich's career in the late 1820s to through the early 1830s. And the fact is, at this point in his career, his work was really falling out of favor. Public taste was shifting away from his suggestive, enigmatic, open-ended landscapes toward more grandiose, more obvious visions of nature. But Friedrich really stuck to his principles, even putting them in writing. And it was in this period that he wrote the manuscript in which that quote we began with appears, that remark that an artist should not try to force too much into a landscape, but leave that space for the imagination. And here we can see him deploying color, a kind of confidence, and I think one that comes in part out of that watercolor practice that we saw. And this in combination with dynamic spatial formulas that create these truly dazzling landscapes that really do capture the essence of landscape as perceived by an individual. In his very final years, Friedrich returned to the materials and motifs with which he had launched his career, making these haunting drawings, an ink wash of megaliths, cemeteries, and the moonlit coast. And his failing health notwithstanding, Friedrich continued to innovate in these late works, pushing landscape to its limits. And I mean that somewhat literally. So whether we have a view of the horizon across an empty shore, an expanse of water, or the depths of a cave, likely an ancient burial site, both confront us with the limits of our own apprehension of the landscape, the depths of the cave interior that we cannot see, or the horizon past which we cannot see. And in both works, we see no figures. So in a way, there's a disorientation of any sense of scale, but also time and place. There's no specificity. We could be anywhere and any time, in the distant past, the present, or the future. And in a way, we assume in these works the place of the monk, of that figure standing there, facing the unknowability of what lies beyond. These works form a moving capstone to Friedrich's career-long meditations on our relationship with the natural world. Finally, to highlight some of the offerings in and around the exhibition, we wanted to point out a wonderful audio guide that is available via QR code in the show as well as on our website. It features Alison and myself, but also various other voices, historians, contemporary artists and poets, as well as a science fiction writer, a death doula, and a Lutheran pastor, each offering their distinctive perspectives on Friedrich's art and what it means today. Also available on the Met's website is a wonderful piece by a sound artist who assembled recordings from his extensive archive of sounds from the places where Friedrich traveled and what he depicts in his art. And it's really worth a listen. Our colleagues also commissioned 2 poets to write works inspired by specific works in the show, The Monk by the Sea and the Met's own 2 Men Contemplating the Moon. And they are absolutely beautiful poems, very much worth a read. Our education team has put together an extraordinary array of programs, some geared toward children, teenagers, various studio workshops and outdoor sketching sessions, expert talks, including the one I mentioned earlier, another that will feature our wonderful colleague Sarah Fruhoff, and another colleague Chris Alessandrini will talk about the audio feature I just mentioned, and we hope you will join us for some more of these programs.
And of course, the adventure continues in the exhibition catalog, which has essays by the 2 of us, and as well as by colleagues, art historians, both from the United States. And we also have entries with contributions from us, German colleagues, and it is beautifully illustrated thanks to our editorial team. But of course, the real exploration takes place upstairs, Gallery 199. If you haven't been to see the exhibition yet, or if you have already been, please go back, wander through the galleries, and make your way, find your own way through the art, through the exhibition. Thank you all very much for coming today.